All right. Well, hey, good evening, everybody. Let's go ahead and get started. If you've got your Bibles, go ahead and turn to Revelation chapter 6. And again, if you need a copy of the notes or the link for the notes, Robert will put that in the discussion area. And so let me go ahead and pull up my screen to share here. So tonight we're going to start in Revelation 6. And I've got this section labeled part 1. We're going to get about halfway through this section, a little bit into chapter 8 tonight in part 1. And what we're going to do tonight as we jump into 6, we're going to start moving forward in what I'll call God's comprehensive program to bring in his kingdom. And one of the things we've got to understand, it's contrary to modern day theology in a lot of churches, but it's actually going to be God who brings in his kingdom. It's not the church. The church isn't bringing in his kingdom. We're not gathering money for his kingdom, as some will say. God is going to bring in his kingdom in his way. And part of the way that he does this is going to be through the tribulation judgments. And so if you ever hear someone say that the church exists to bring in the kingdom or to establish the kingdom of God, they're really missing the point of the tribulation judgments. It's the tribulation judgments on the earth that will destroy the kingdoms of the world so that God will bring in his eternal kingdom. And so this is actually a necessity of God's program. And so we're going to start moving through that this evening. But just as a reminder, we've been looking at this, and you've got that chart, that time frame chart. We've been through really the introduction in Revelation chapter 1. These are the things in Revelation 1:19 that John has seen. Then we moved to chapters 2 and 3. These are the letters to the 7 churches in Asia. These are the things which are, again, from Revelation 1:19. And then finally, when we get to 4 and 5, which we covered last week, Revelation 4 and 5, we move to the throne room of God. And then we see the Lamb who's worthy to take the scroll. Remember, we talked about what that scroll was. It's the title deed to the earth. It's the claim of the right to rule the earth that was given to man in the garden. They gave that basically through the fall to Satan. He usurped that authority. Jesus, through these tribulation judgments, is going to reclaim the rightful ownership, if you will, of ruling over the earth. Now, this evening, we're going to move into the 7 seal judgments of Revelation 6, which then moves into the 7 trumpet judgments. And so you see this phrase, things that take place after these things. That's Revelation 1:19. We're kind of moving through that last portion of the book. And when we get to the 7th seal judgment, when Jesus rips open that 7th seal or busts that 7th seal, it's going to flow right into the 7 trumpet judgments. When eventually we get to the 7th trumpet judgment, when that is blown, it rolls right into the 7 bowl judgments. So it's the last judgment in each of those series of 3 judgments kind of leads into the next series of judgments. And so we'll kind of see that tonight. A couple of just quick introductory comments as we go in this evening is that the 7 sealed scroll, again, is the comprehensive program of God, which is going to culminate in the second coming of Christ. The scroll itself contains God's entire program of wrath and judgment upon the earth to bring his program to pass. You're going to see as Jesus starts ripping open these seals, a judgment ensues. And so this is God's comprehensive program of judgment to bring about his kingdom program on this earth. Now, there's really 2 aspects of that judgment. First, for the unsaved world and the world system that's under the sway of Satan, these judgments is how God destroys the kingdoms of this world in preparation for his eternal kingdom. We go back to the book of Daniel, and this is why Daniel is so significant in the study of eschatology. But in Daniel 2:44, we read, "And in the days of these kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. And the kingdom shall not be left to other people. It shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever." And so it's speaking of God's eternal kingdom, that when it comes into play, it's going to destroy all the kingdoms of men, specifically in that context, the final phase of the Roman government led by the Antichrist. And so from an unsaved world perspective, these judgments is how God destroys the kingdoms of this world. Now, for the Jewish nation, from their perspective, this is how God finalizes and accomplishes the 6 things that he said he would do for the nation of Israel by the end of the 70 weeks. We remember that in Daniel 9:24. 70 weeks are determined for your people and for your holy city. He's talking to Daniel. So he's talking about the Jews, and the holy city is Jerusalem. And then he gives 6 things he's going to accomplish, or 6 purposes for the 70 weeks, which the last 7 years of that 70-week period is the tribulation period. So that has to be completed to accomplish the following: to finish transgression, to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, which will be manifested in the kingdom, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. And so those are just some introductory comments as we get into the judgments of the tribulation period. So that kind of leads us into the first seal judgment. Let's read Revelation 6, verses 1 through 2. We read, "Now I saw when the Lamb opened one of the seals, and I heard one of the 4 living creatures saying with a voice like thunder, 'Come and see.' And I looked, and behold, a white horse. He who sat on it had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he went out conquering and to conquer." And one of the things that we see right out of the bat is that the Lamb, Jesus Christ, is clearly the one who opens the first seal. And what this tells us is that the Lamb is the one initiating the seal judgments on the earth. He is the one who's initiating or getting the judgments of the tribulation period kicked off. Now, remember, the reason he's the one opening the seal judgments is because he's the only one in the universe who's worthy and qualified to do so. He's uniquely qualified. We read about that in Revelation 5, verse 7. Then he came, speaking of the Lamb, and took the scroll out of the right hand of him who sat on the throne. Verse 8, "Now when he had taken the scroll, the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders fell down before the Lamb, each having a harp and golden bowls full of incense, which are the prayers of the saints. And they sang a new song, saying," and notice what they say, "You are worthy to take the scroll and to open its seals," which is what he's doing here in Revelation 6:1. Why? Notice that word for you were slain and have redeemed us to God by your blood out of every tribe and tongue and people and nation. Okay, and then verse 10, "and have made us kings and priests to our God, and we shall reign on the earth." So he's the one who is worthy. That's why he is the one now opening these seals of judgment. Additionally, notice that the 4 living creatures are also around and involved in this judgment by inviting John to come and see. And you'll see that they're going to be involved, specifically mentioned here in the first 4 seal judgments, the 4 living creatures that we had looked at last week in the throne room of heaven. And so the first seal, as we see here in Revelation 6, 1 through 2, is simply a man sitting on a white horse who had a bow and a crown, and it was given to him, and he went out conquering and to conquer. Now, many people see a white horse here. They automatically assume it's Jesus, but the most probable view is that this is a prophecy of Antichrist, who's going to make a covenant with Israel, but only as a pretense for destroying the Jews. Again, as I said, many people see the phrase white horse. We assume that it's Jesus Christ because of Revelation 19:11, again, where Jesus is said to be on a white horse when he comes to destroy the Antichrist and his armies. The problem with this interpretation is it doesn't fit chronologically, because Jesus comes on a white horse at the end of the tribulation, not at the beginning of the tribulation. And additionally, since Jesus is the one in heaven holding the scroll and breaking the seals, he's not on a horse seeking to conquer the earth at the same time. In fact, he doesn't need to conquer the earth. In fact, when he comes in his kingdom, the earth, his kingdom is going to be established. There's not going to be much left for him to do other than to put down the rebellion of the Antichrist. And so, anyways, it just doesn't seem to fit the interpretation. Additionally, what we see is that this man on the white horse had a bow, but he did not have any arrows, implying that his conquering would be accomplished through diplomacy, not through physical violence or war. And so that seems to fit really well with what we know kicks off the tribulation period, which is the signing of a covenant or a peace treaty with the nation of Israel that we read about in Daniel chapter 9. Also, the fact that a crown, which is the Greek word Stephanos, was given to him seems to imply the great prestige that people will give this man, and then hence his ability to conquer without physical means. In other words, he's going to be highly favored, highly respected, highly honored. There's going to be a prestige, a charisma about him that's going to allow him to conquer and to unite people and become the leader in that sense. And so we see this spoken of, that this man will enrapture people with his ability to charm and lead. And again, it's no doubt a reference to the Antichrist. It also explains his desire to copy or appear to mirror Jesus Christ and his white horse. Why would Satan send the bad guy, the Antichrist, on a black horse? That might give it away. So again, he's trying to mirror goodness. He's trying to appear. We know that Satan's angels even appear as an angel of light. So even his appearance on a white horse may be deceptive in nature to lessen people's concerns about the Antichrist. Also, because of the use of the word Stephanos here, translated crown, the temporary nature of his influence is also being brought forth, right? He's going to have a 7-year reign at the top. That's very temporary in the grand scheme of things. And so Stephanos was a crown that was given generally in the athletic games of the day. It was typically comprised of leaves and other perishable items. So it was a temporary type crown. And that was kind of the nature of his crown. Now, the question becomes, why is this a judgment? How is this a judgment? Well, the reason it's a judgment is because this man, if we're identifying him correctly, will be opposed to everything that involves God, and he will lead the world to their doom in their rejection of God. We learn this about him in 2 Thessalonians 2, verses 3 through 4. And it says, "Let no one deceive you by any means, for that day will not come unless the falling away comes first, and the man of sin is revealed, the son of perdition." This is speaking of the Antichrist. Notice what it says about him in verse 4. "Who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he sits as God in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God." And so he comes in peace. He comes to establish maybe a unified kind of world system. But he's ultimately opposed to God in everything that he does. And that's eventually going to come out in clearer detail as the tribulation proceeds. So that moves us to the second seal. And the second seal is broken. We're going to see a conflict on earth. Let's read verses 3 and 4. "When he opened the second seal," again speaking of the Lamb, Jesus Christ, he opened the second seal, "I heard the second living creature saying, 'Come and see.' Another horse, fiery red, went out, and it was granted to the one who sat on it to take peace from the earth, and that people should kill one another, and there was given to him a great sword." And so we see that this second seal is a man sitting on a fiery red horse. And so he went out to take peace from the earth, and that people should kill one another, and he was given a great sword. And throughout the notes, we're going to see that you're going to see references to the Olivet Discourse. You see it there, Matthew 24:6. And because what happens is it seems to be what Jesus is referring to when he's answering the disciples' questions in Matthew 24 about the end of the age. Matthew 24:6 says, "And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet." And see, many people look at the Olivet Discourse and they see this as stuff leading up to the tribulation period. But I see this as stuff that's happening in the tribulation period, largely because of Jesus's reference in Matthew 24:8 to birth pangs. Birth pangs seems to tie it to the tribulation period, because birth pangs describes Jacob's trouble, which describes the tribulation period in Jeremiah 30. And so you've got these things mentioned in the Olivet Discourse that seem to fit with some of these seal judgments. And so Matthew 24:6 seems to fit with this second seal judgment of war or conflict on earth. Now, this particular rider, this man on a red horse, is going to will actively take any kind of tranquility, harmony, or state of rest from the earth. And he's going to do it in the following ways. The first is we're going to see people killing one another, and then he was given a great sword. And so with this seal, we're gonna see the murderous intents of the hearts of mankind, and it will begin to manifest themselves. They will begin to manifest themselves without impunity. And I believe this describes the breakout of wars, and maybe even personal vigilante type conflict around the world. You know, there's movies that come out. I can't even remember the name of one, but I think it's something like the Cleansing, and it's like one day a year, people can murder people and get away with it, you know, and it's going to be like that kind of concept, but it's going to be every day once this second seal is broken. And as a result of these actions, no one on planet Earth will feel safe or secure. They're going to be living in a war zone continually. And one of the things that we know is in 2 Thessalonians 2, verses 6 through 10, the Holy Spirit as a restrainer of evil upon the earth will be removed at the rapture of the church. And so what that tells us is this, is the evil that this world and the people of this world are truly capable of has never fully been seen before in the history of the world. And so when the Spirit of God is removed in the sense of restraining evil on the earth through believers at the rapture, and then this second seal is broken, we're going to see the worst of humanity that's ever existed in the world. And I say we, I just mean the people alive during the tribulation period is going to see the worst that humanity has to offer in this area of violence. So that's the second seal. Pretty clear why that might be a judgment. The third seal that we're going to read about is in verses 5 through 6. Let's read that. And when he opened the third seal, again, Jesus opening the third seal, I heard the third living creature say, "Come and see." So I looked, and behold, a black horse, and he who sat on it had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard a voice in the midst of the four living creatures saying, "A quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not harm the oil and the wine." And so again, the third seal is a man sitting on a black horse, and he held a pair of scales in his hands. Again, let's go to Matthew 24:7 in the Olivet Discourse, which I think fits with this seal. It says, "For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines." That's what I think the scales is referencing. "Pestilences and earthquakes in various places." And so we see that famine and inflation are actually both normal and natural outcomes of war and or uncertainty in the world economic markets. You know, typically when there's a war going on, the economy doesn't do very well. And so people try to adjust things, and there are food shortages, crops and fields are destroyed in war, inflation kicks in, etc. And it just really causes the commodity markets to go haywire. And so because this writer holds a pair of scales, and because of what we read in verse 6, it seems as if this is a reference to commodity pricing and then general overall commodity markets. And so what we see is a voice within the midst of the four living creatures makes a statement regarding a great famine and overpriced food during this time as a result. Now, we don't know who the voice belongs to. Maybe the voice belongs to God the Father. Maybe the voice belongs to the Lamb, since it's coming from the midst of the four living creatures, but we can't be certain. It doesn't actually tell us in the text. But just for a frame of reference, normally a denarius was a day's wage for a rural worker in Palestine in Jesus' day. And normally that day's worth of wage, that one denarius would buy 10 quarts of wheat or 30 quarts of barley. And so when we see this, what it's being said here, under these famine conditions, the same wage would only buy 1 quart of wheat versus 10, or 3 quarts of barley versus 30. And so, in other words, it's going to be 1/10 the normal supply of food. That's how bad the inflation is going to be. And so 1 quart of wheat, just to put it in perspective, was the daily ration for a soldier. And so at this point in the tribulation, the daily wage will only buy food for one person. And so you imagine, typically a daily wage, in our day, if you're making medium income, let's just say, you could typically support your family of 4, let's say, on that wage. But in this day, the pricing is going to be so off that a daily wage will only feed one person. And so you wonder how families are going to survive. It's going to be a very difficult time with this third seal following the first two. Now, the phrase at the end of verse 6 where it says, do not harm the oil and the wine is an interesting comment at this point in the tribulation, because it seems as if the food and needs of the common people will be impacted greatly, whereas the luxuries of the wealthy will not. In other words, the oil and the wine kind of communicating luxury and maybe the finer types of things in life, those won't be impacted. And so if this is the case, you could see how class distinctions, jealousy and hatred of the rich by the poor could increase exponentially. You know, the poor doesn't even have enough bread to eat, and the rich have wine and all of this opulence that they're still enjoying, even in the midst of all of this difficulty. And we know even that many wealthy people have security, or they have fences, or they have protection. They might not have been as fully impacted by the second seal as the average person on the street. And so, again, actually, that's this next point. Because the wealthy are typically insulated from violence and harm, they are probably better able to protect and secure all that they need and more. And so you can see, how that might even create additional violence or hatred between class systems in this famine time on earth. That brings us to our fourth seal, and we see widespread death on earth. And let's go ahead and read that, verse 7 through 8. And when he had opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth living creature saying, "Come and see." So I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and the name of him who sat on it was Death, and Hades followed with him. And power was given to them over a fourth of the earth to kill with sword, with hunger, with death, and by the beasts of the earth. And so Death is the name here of the horseman riding on this horse. And Death has a sidekick with him named Hades. And so you've got these two sidekicks that are going to be enacting widespread death on earth. Now, Hades in the Greek, when we look at the word Hades, it's just the Greek name of the abode of the dead. Okay, the Hebrew name is Sheol. But this is where the souls of dead humans go when they die. Now, before the cross work of Jesus Christ, there were two compartments in Hades. There was one for the saved, known as paradise or Abraham's bosom, and then one for the unsaved, known as hell or torments. And so this is why Jesus tells the thief on the cross, "Today you will be with me in paradise." They were going to the place of the dead for the saved. That was located in Hades. Hades, sometimes we use Hades as a synonym for hell. There's probably a reason for that, but Hades conceptually is really just the abode of the dead. And then there were two compartments there. Again, paradise, Abraham's bosom, or hell or torments. Now, following the death of Jesus Christ, paradise was cleared out of Hades, and the inhabitants were taken to heaven to be with Jesus Christ. Hades now only has one compartment, and that compartment is known as hell. And those who are saved when they die, we learn in 2 Corinthians 5:8 that to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. And so the saved in our day, they go straight to heaven to be with the Lord Jesus. They no longer go to Hades or the compartment known as paradise or Abraham's bosom. And so I just kind of put together a quick graphic. Hades is the abode of the dead. Heaven is where God resides. And within Hades, there were two compartments prior to the cross: hell or torments, and then paradise or Abraham's bosom. Now, from Luke 16, we know that there was a great chasm in between these two places where you couldn't go back and forth. You couldn't, you remember the rich man wanted the beggar Lazarus to come over and drop a drop of water on his tongue because he was suffering hell or torments. But Abraham said, "No, he can't. There's too big of a chasm to go back and forth." And so that's how it existed in the Old Testament prior to the cross. And so you had unsaved people who rejected God and his solution for their sin and his provision for their righteous standing before him, which again was secured by faith. It's faith by grace through faith always secures salvation throughout the Bible. There's not multiple ways of salvation, but people rejected the Lord in his provision, and some didn't. Some trusted Jesus Christ, trusted in, we read in Genesis 15:6 that Abraham believed God and it was credited to him as righteousness. We read about David, how he writes in Romans 4, actually writes in Psalms, but it's quoted in Romans 4, blessed is the man to whom his iniquity is not credited to his account. Okay, and so you see that writing from David. And so anyone today who puts their faith in the finished work of Jesus Christ are saved. And now, since the cross, those people go straight to heaven. Jesus actually cleared out the compartment of Hades, known as paradise or Abraham's bosom, following his work on the cross, and he led them into heaven. And we kind of read about that in Ephesians chapter 4, verses 7 through 10. So I just kind of make that as a side note there. We can talk about that more if needed, but that's kind of generically when we get to this point in history, when it says that death was on the horse and Hades followed with him, the only compartment left there is the one known as hell. And we'll talk about what eventually becomes of hell. We're going to see that Hades will eventually be cast into the lake of fire in Revelation 20. And so that's the final destination of the unsaved. This is more of a permanent holding cell for their judgment day, which again we'll read about in Revelation chapter 20. But so this seal is going to take the life, it says, of a fourth of the people on earth. And we're talking the entire earth here. And they're going to kill them with the sword, hunger. They're going to utilize the beasts of the earth. And these are all, by the way, natural results of violence and war and the famine and inflation that we're going to see in seal 3. Now, when you start doing mathematics, the world's population is roughly 7 to 8 billion people right now. That means that these initial calamities would reduce that number by 1.75 billion people. You know, again, put it in perspective, the United States is about 350 to 400 million people. We're talking about, 4 times that amount being lost by the end of this 4 seal. By the way, and this is interesting to note, this death toll does not count the deaths of those who are caught up during the violence from the second seal. It doesn't even count that. So it might even be over 2 billion, maybe a fourth of the population gone by this point. It's just, it just puts into perspective the incredible difficulty of this time period on earth. So according to this verse, there are going to be multiple options for this horseman to kill people, including the sword, which is probably referencing seal 2 or the ongoing results of seal 2, hunger and famine, which again is the ongoing results of seal 3. But now there's also wild beasts that are introduced in seal 4. And this is, this makes sense when you've got lots of dead bodies, probably too many to bury. You've got a shortage in food. If there's a shortage in food for humans, there's probably a shortage in food for wild animals. They're going to start hunting. And so it's just going to be an absolute war zone on top of being in a safari with a bunch of hungry, violent animals that are also looking to eat. So it's going to be a dangerous, dangerous place. And so this is going to be the greatest destruction of human life that's recorded in world history. And so it's just incredible to think of the massive amounts of dead bodies that are going to be strewn all across the world as a result of these first 4 seals. But then we move to the 5th seal, and you think, man, how could it get any worse? Well, then we kind of jump. We actually jump to heaven. We see the cry of the martyrs, and we read about that in verses 9 through 11. He says, when he opened the 5th seal, again, Jesus the Lamb opening the 5th seal, I saw under the altars the souls of those who had been slain for the word of God and for the testimony which they held. And they cried with a loud voice, saying, how long, O Lord, holy and true, until you judge and avenge our blood on those who dwell on the earth? Then a white robe was given to each of them, and it was said to them that they should rest a little while longer until both the number of their fellow servants and their brethren who would be killed as they were was completed. And so when the 5th seal is opened, the scene now shifts, not shirts, that's a typo, shifts from earth to heaven. And specifically, we go to under the altar in heaven. Just kind of interesting, a couple of details there that are interesting. And so this seems to reflect a scene in the heavenly temple. Remember, the one that the Jewish temple was modeled after was a heavenly temple. We kind of read about that in Hebrews 8, but the model of the Jewish temple is based on a heavenly model of a heavenly temple in heaven. So these martyrs are under the altar in this heavenly temple. And in keeping with the fact that the blood of the Old Testament sacrifices were poured out under the altar, those who are martyred for their faith in God and their testimony are found there. They're found under the altar, basically representing where their blood had been shed or poured out in their martyrdom. And the text tells us that this group of martyrs continually held fast to the Lord during the first 4 seals. And now they're crying out for justice and for the Lord to avenge their deaths. Now, who are these martyrs? And why did I say they went through the first 4 seals? Well, we're going to see here in a second. They give us a clue, especially as who they want the Lord to avenge them from. And so these martyrs must be those who have died after the rapture and who became believers during the first part of the tribulation. So they're not yet in resurrected bodies. Notice John says their souls, right? Their souls in verse 9 is what's under the altar. And we know this because God doesn't resurrect tribulation saints until the end of the 7-year tribulation period. And we'll kind of get to that in Revelation 20. And so the fact that they don't have resurrection bodies means that they weren't part of the church, that somehow these are people who had gotten saved after the rapture, and somehow by the tribulation period or at the beginning of the tribulation had gotten saved. Again, we don't know how much time is between the rapture and the start of the tribulation period. But anyways, these are saved people who had gone through a portion of the seal judgments in the tribulation thus far. Now, question, how do we know that they died during the first 4 seal judgments? Well, verse 10 gives us a clue, because they want the Lord to judge and avenge their blood on those who dwell on the earth. So this probably coincides with seal 2 in the worldwide violence. Probably, they probably wouldn't have blamed anyone in seal 3. That was more of a scarcity, a famine. Some may have starved to death, but this seemed to be a violent taking of their life, which most likely occurred in either seal 2 or seal 4, where that violence was worldwide. So notice here that they are comforted. They're comforted in verse 11 with white robes, which once again seems to communicate reward due to their faithfulness unto death. And we see that not only with the church in Revelation 19, the bride of Christ, but we've seen that also in the letters to the churches. There was a promise of a white robe, and that seemed to go with the reward. So these are martyred saints, they're martyred tribulation saints who are getting their reward in terms of a white robe, because they had held faithful to the Lord even unto death. Now, again, why is this a judgment? This is a seal judgment, right? So it doesn't seem like a judgment, but it's a judgment because, as God implies, he is going to avenge their blood on those who dwell on the earth. And he's going to do so in a complete and full way through the rest of the tribulation judgments and eventually his second coming. And so they really, this is a prayer for them and their blood to be avenged. God is going to answer their prayer in additional judgments. And so this is why this would fit as a judgment here. It is a sad observation to note that there will be more martyrs to come during the tribulation period. Notice how he says that in verse 11. He says they should rest a little while longer until both of the number of their fellow servants and their brethren who would be killed as they were was completed. In other words, there's more to come. And we know, as we get into Revelation 12 and 13, that Satan is going to empower the Antichrist in the second half of the tribulation period to do just this. Revelation 13:7 says, "And it was granted to him, the Antichrist, to make war with the saints and to overcome them. And authority was given him over every tribe, tongue, and nation." We also read about this in Daniel chapter 7 in its description of the Antichrist. Same exact description, that he is going to overcome saints during the tribulation period. And so God is going to avenge the blood of all of the martyred saints in due time. And this is kind of what the saints in the fifth seal are crying for. And God says, I'm going to do it. I'll take care of it. but we have to wait for the full number of martyrs to come in before I finish that judgment. So that brings us to the sixth seal, which is cosmic disturbances. And let's read verse 12 through 17. And so I looked, John writes, when he opened the sixth seal, again, the Lamb is opening the seals, and behold, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth of hair, and the moon became like blood, and the stars of heaven fell to the earth as a fig tree drops its late figs when it is shaken by a mighty wind. Then the sky receded as a scroll when it is rolled up, and every mountain and island was moved out of its place. And the kings of the earth, the great men, the rich men, the commanders, the mighty men, every slave and every free man, hid themselves in the caves and in the rocks of the mountains, and said to the mountains and rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of his wrath has come, and who is able to stand? And so we see that when the sixth seal is opened by the Lamb, suddenly great cosmic disturbances start taking place. They're going to be terrifying because they include the following. We see that there's going to be a great earthquake. Again, that was mentioned in the Olivet Discourse, right, by Jesus. I think Matthew 24, verse 7. Earthquakes. There's going to be a great earthquake, great in physical magnitude. Maybe the San Andreas Fault in California will finally break. They talk about those kind of things all the time. The sun is going to become black. The moon is going to become red. The stars are going to begin to fall to the earth, which is probably a reference to meteorites. The reason we say that is because even the smallest stars are larger than the earth. The Greek word used here, translated star, is the Greek word aster. It's where we get our word asteroid. So it can mean star, but it can also describe asteroids or meteorites. It's kind of used of an astral body, a space body, if you will. So it's probably not a star, again, for the reason I mentioned. Even the smallest stars are larger than the earth. So if that's falling to the earth, that would be a problem. It'd take out the earth. So it's probably, rocks and meteorites and asteroids that are hitting the earth in this seal judgment. And then we see that the sky literally splits apart and the universe appears as if it is coming apart at the seams. We see that there in verse 14, the sky receded as a scroll when it is rolled up. So lots of things going on. We don't, John could be describing, he's doing the best he can to describe what's going on. There could be, along with the earthquakes, there could be some violent meteorological storms, such as tornadoes, monsoons, hurricanes. All of that could be encompassed with all of this disruption to the cosmos, basically. And so one thing we see is that every mountain is said, and every island is also going to be moved out of its place. Now, just think of mountains that you've seen, and they're actually going to be moved out of their place, and kind of what disruption that would cause in the world. It would shake up the entire earth, and it would be completely terrifying. I don't know if anyone of you have ever been in an earthquake. I've never been in one, but I've talked to people who have, and it's frightening to feel the ground underneath you shaking like that. That's what's going to be going on during this seal judgment. And you notice the terror, because the response of every type of person on the earth at this time is that they will attempt to hide themselves, and they will actually wish death upon themselves. The text literally tells us that they will hope to die by being crushed by mountains and rocks. And so you've got this fear, you've got this miserable fear, and people would rather die than live. Additionally, a unique insight is given here, because those on the earth, this is amazing, because those on the earth are going to recognize where the judgment is coming from at this point. They're going to see that it's from God the Father, and it's from the Lamb, our Lord Jesus Christ. And notice they said that in verse 16. It says, fall on us and hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. Those are unbelievers saying that here in Revelation 6:16. And notice again, verse 17, for the great day of his wrath has come, and who is able to stand? These are unbelievers saying these things. So how do they see this? We don't really know. Maybe it's the result of the sky being split. Maybe they were able to glimpse into the throne room of heaven. We don't know. Maybe it's a message that they've heard from the 144,000 witnesses that we'll see in the next chapter. Maybe they've heard this through Christians that they've killed. We don't really know, but they understand that it's a divine judgment that they're experiencing. However, rather than repent or change their mind and put their faith in God and in the Lamb, they reject them both and they want to be hidden from them. And so the rhetorical question that we see here in verse 17 is seems to be answered in chapter 7. Chapter 7 gives us 144,000 sealed Jewish servants who are able to stand via divine protection through the tribulation. Additionally, chapter 7 also gives us an innumerable group of martyrs who stood through the tribulation. They didn't make it to the end, but they stood, if you will, holding fast to the Lord unto death, and they became martyrs of the Lord during the tribulation period. So who is able to stand? Verse 17, we're about to meet a group of 144,000 Jewish servants who stood through the first 6 sealed judgments and who will now stand to the end of the tribulation due to the special protection that God is going to give them. So we move to chapter 7. And notice in verse 1, we read, "And after these things, I saw 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding the 4 winds of the earth, that the wind should not blow on the earth, on the sea, or on any tree." And so the phrase here at the beginning of verse 1 of chapter 7, after these things, again, gives us a timestamp as to when the events in the first 8 verses of chapter 7 occur. They happen after the 6 seal judgments. Okay, so we've just been through the 6 seal judgments. Now something happens after that 6th seal judgment. And so these are 144,000, we're going to see, sealed servants who actually lived through the first 6 seal judgments, and they lived through it without any specific divine protection. They had not been sealed yet. They're going to be sealed now in time, in history, basically, but it actually follows the 6 seal judgments. So these are, as we're going to see, Jewish men who survived the first 6 seal judgments, like many people will do. And now they're going to be sealed by God and have a special purpose for them. Now, what we're going to see here as we get into verse 2 as well, we're going to have 5 additional angels involved here. 4 of them are holding back the 4 winds of the earth and are being held back themselves from causing harm on the earth, the sea, or the trees. But 1 angel possesses the seal of the living God. And he's the one who's instructing the other 4 angels to hold off temporarily. In fact, let's look at verse 2. It says, "Then I saw another angel, in addition to the 4 mentioned in verse 1, ascending from the east, having the seal of the living God. And he cried with a loud voice to the 4 angels to whom it was granted to harm the earth and the sea, saying, Do not harm the earth, the sea, or the trees, till we have sealed the servant of our gods on their foreheads. And I heard the number of those who were sealed, 144,000 of all the tribes of the children of Israel were sealed." And so we basically have a short break from the destruction of the tribulation judgments, so that the Lord can seal these 144,000 Jewish servants who have been set apart specifically for his purposes during the tribulation period. Now, the mention of the seal on their foreheads indicates that it's probably visible at some point. If God had just sealed them, he probably would have just said, "And he sealed these men." But because he adds that additional detail of on their foreheads, it seems like it may be visible potentially, or at least it has the possibility of being visible since it's got that specified detail on their foreheads. And apparently this seal on their foreheads is going to protect them from the judgments of God that are still to come on the earth. Although it's unclear in this passage alone if they would be protected from other people's assaults. It doesn't really just get into that detail, but they are going to be spared, and they're going to be standing at the end of the tribulation period. We'll see in Revelation 14, because following the trumpet and bowl judgments, they'll be with Jesus Christ at his second coming, and so they'll come back up again. Now, these sealed servants seem to survive the entire tribulation period, and they are one example, just one example. We'll point this out as we go, of God's merciful ways to give sinners a chance to hear the truth and to change their minds about God even during the tribulation period. You know, many people, and I think the question has even come up, can people get saved during the tribulation period? Well, I think we've already seen that in chapter 6 with the cry of the martyrs under the throne of God. Their souls are under the throne in heaven. They were killed during the tribulation period. But we also see God making opportunities for his message to get out. Obviously people will have the written word of God, but now it appears that these 144,000 have a special role during the tribulation period. And I believe this is another aspect of God's mercy to get that message out to unbelievers. And although they're never specifically called witnesses in the text of Revelation, many have assumed that they are because of the rest of this chapter beginning in verse 9. In verse 9, in such close proximity to the 144,000 sealed servants, we see a great multitude of saved people. And so many people have just connected these two groups, like the saved people at the end of chapter 7 are there as a result of the ministry of the 144,000 sealed servants. And so I'm okay with that interpretation. That seems to at least fit or make sense with the context and the organization of the material for John in chapter 7. So because the sealed servants are mentioned, again, in close proximity to the saved multitude of martyrs, many, again, have connected them to the salvation of those who were martyred. And we'll kind of look at that group next here in this next section. But a couple of other comments about the 144,000 witnesses. The number of the ones being sealed are 144,000. We can see that they are men. It's all masculine pronouns. And there are 12,000 per tribe of Israel. Notice that God goes to great extremes to identify exactly whom he will seal and protect through the Great Tribulation. They are 144,000 sealed Israelite servants, not the church. He's not talking about the church. He's not talking about a separate group of 144,000 witnesses, like the people who come and knock on our doors. This is not what he's talking about at all. He's talking about Jewish men from genetically from tribes of Israel. This is what we're talking about here in Revelation chapter 7. Now, the question becomes, why this list of tribes? We won't read through it, but you can see in verse 5 and going forward, there's a list of tribes. Ironically, there's at least 19 lists of Jacob's sons in the Old Testament, and not one of them is the same as the list here. And so you'll see that the tribe of Dan and the tribe of Ephraim are omitted from this list. And it's a great question. Why is that the case? The best answer that I have come up with in my studies and in reading what other people have said is it's most likely due to the fact that both of these tribes went into idolatry and they took other tribes in Israel with them. There's a level of faithfulness needed out of these 144,000 Jewish servants. And it's almost like these two tribes, based on their past history, have kind of disqualified them from this important service during the tribulation. But again, that's my best interpretation. Definitely willing and open for discussion on that. But that's kind of where we're moving at this point. Now, it brings us to verse 9, and we've got this incredible multitude that is saved from the tribulation period. Let's read verse 9. Let's kind of start there. After these things I looked, and behold, a great multitude which no one could number, of all nations, tribes, peoples, and tongues, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed with white robes, with palm branches in their hands, and crying out with a loud voice, saying, Salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb. And so let's look at those first two verses here. So the same phrase used in verse 9, you'll notice that phrase, after these things. It's probably the same after these things from verse 1. So both the 144,000 sealed Jewish servants being sealed and then John's witnessing of the multitude here are probably simultaneous events happening between the sixth and seventh seal. So John it's like he sees the sealing of the servants. He looks over, he sees this multitude. After these things seem to tie those things together again between the sixth and seventh seals. And so while one of these events is happening on earth, that's the sealing of the 144,000 servants, the other events, starting in verse 9, are happening in heaven. It's a great multitude of martyrs in the throne room of heaven. And the martyrs picked up their white robes during the fifth seal judgment. We saw that in Revelation 6:11. And now instead of being under the altar, which is what we saw in the fifth seal, they're now standing before the altar. So they've kind of switched locations here. And so again, the answer to the question in Revelation 6:17, who is able to stand? Well, the 144,000 are standing on earth. They're sealed. They're standing. And then we see now the saved martyrs from the tribulation. They are now standing before the throne. And so kind of thematically, it tends to answer that question that was asked by those people on earth. And so now that we see the martyred saints there, they actually begin to lead everyone else in heaven into the worship, including the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders. Let's read that, verse 11. Well, verse 10, they cried out with a loud voice saying, salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb. Verse 11, all the angels stood around the throne and the elders and the 4 living creatures and fell on their faces before the throne and worshiped God. And so these martyrs lead the worship in heaven. It's incredible. Verse 12 saying, amen, blessing and glory and wisdom, thanksgiving and honor and power and might be to our God forever and ever. Amen. And so they had this effect of starting a worship train. You know, I don't know if you've ever been to a big sporting event and you started the wave. You know, that's kind of what these martyred saints did in heaven. They started this worship response and everybody began to respond. Amen. So be it. Yes. Let me add to that. He is worthy of praise. And so this is kind of what happens here in this scene. Then in verses 13 through 17, we've got an interesting conversation which happens between John and one of the 24 elders. Let's read that. Then one of the elders answered, verse 13, saying to me, who are these arrayed in white robes, and where did they come from? John and I said to him, sir, you know. John's like, how would I know? He's kind of like, you know, you're in heaven. You know who these people are. So in verse 14, he goes on. So he said to me, these are the ones who come out of the great tribulation, washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. Therefore they are before the throne of God and serve him day and night in his temple, and he who sits on the throne will dwell among them. They shall neither hunger any more, nor thirst any more. The sun shall not strike them, nor any heat. For the Lamb who is in the midst of the throne will shepherd them and lead them to the living fountains of waters. And God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. So again, the elder asked John who this great multitude was, where they came from. John doesn't know, and then the elder answers his own question. He describes them as those who have come out of the great tribulation through death, and those who are saved. In other words, they've washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. Again, blood, without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness. So this reflects somebody who's trusted in the finished work of Christ, that he shed his blood for them on their behalf and paid the penalty for their sins. And notice that we see that God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. We see that the Lamb leads them, he shepherds them, he leads them to waters. And so much conjecture has been made over this phrase that God will wipe away every tear. And many people have debated what it means. But in this context, this phrase definitely does not refer to church-age saints. God may wipe away the tears of church-age saints, but this verse doesn't teach that here in this context. This is specifically talking about martyrs from the tribulation, having their tears wiped away. One common explanation of this phrase, referencing the sorrow that Christians will have when they realize their life could have meant what it could have meant to the Lord, is foreign to this context. That's what a lot of people say, that God is going to wipe away believers in the church age. He's going to wipe away their tears, because once they realize what their life could have meant to the Lord, we're all going to be in tears, and he's going to wipe the tears away. Again, it's just not taught here in this verse. This verse is talking about something totally different. In fact, the phrase is mentioned one other time in Revelation 21:4, but that happens at least 7 years after the Bema Seat judgment of Christ, or the Bema is really how it's pronounced, but where believers are rewarded for their works or deeds in life. So again, just that concept of wiping away tears just doesn't seem to fit church-age saints, although there's a lot of speculation about that. But when you look at the context of both of those passages, it doesn't seem to fit, is kind of my point. Most likely, what does it mean? Well, I think it just means it's kind of figurative, poetic language. And it could be literal language too, but it's basically stating that there's going to be no reason to be sad in heaven. No one's will have a reason to cry about anything any longer. They're crying out to the Lord in the fifth seal. They're begging the Lord to provide vengeance against their enemies. And so that might be an emotional cry, and the Lord may be wiping away their tears, saying, hey, I'm gonna take care of that for you. I'm gonna take care of avenging your blood on the earth. And so that might be the case here. But again, this context is specifically for tribulation age saints who have died or been martyred during the tribulation period. All right, that brings us to the seventh seal. And the seventh seal will prepare us for the seven trumpet judgments. And so in verse 1, and when we get to the trumpet judgments, when you hear trumpet, just think fractions. There's a ton of fractions, like 1/4, 1/3, 1/4, 1/3. You're going to hear all these fractions. So just think of the seven trumpet judgments as the fractional judgments. And what we read here in chapter 8 and verse 1 is in contrast to the loud crying out and worship by the multitude of martyrs that we just read about, the 24 elders, the four living creatures, and the angels, there's now silence in heaven for 30 minutes. Let's read that in verse 1. When he opened the seventh seal, again, the Lamb is opening the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven for about a half an hour. Now, this is definitely the calm before the storm. So when the Lamb breaks the seventh seal of the scroll, silence fell on the heavenly scene. And for a half an hour, there was silence for everyone gathered around the throne. They're all waiting expectantly to see what God would do next. Jesus has now just finished the seventh seal. Like, okay, what happens next? Is that over? And it's probably a literal 30 minutes, since there's no clues in Revelation that it's somehow, it's allegorical. I just think it's a literal 30 minutes. And what's the purpose of the silence? I think the purpose of the silence is to prepare the audience, those watching this, John specifically, for what's about to happen. It's heightening the expectation of God's awesome judgments to follow. Now, if you've ever been in a situation where you've had to experience silence for 30 seconds, that seems like forever. Imagine silence for 30 minutes. And so again, it must have been noticeably painful even for John to have mentioned it. And he, just keeping track of the time there, just amazing. And so in verse 2, we read, and I saw the seven angels who stand before God, and to them were given seven trumpets. And so Jesus has been cracking the seals. Now he's going to give the trumpets to the seven angels. And so they are given seven trumpets. And these are going to be seven additional seven additional judgments on the earth. And they spring right out of the seventh seal being broken. And so I mentioned this earlier, but you've got the seven seal judgments. And when that seventh seal is broken open, it springs right into the seven trumpet judgment. In other words, the seven trumpet judgments come out of the seventh seal judgment. Because when you look at the seventh seal, there's really not a judgment other than the seven trumpets now spring right out of that. And so in verses 5 through 6, we're going to see that there's an act of throwing fire from the altar to the earth. And this caused the seven angels with the seven trumpets to get ready to sound. And so let's kind of read the rest of that first section. Verse 3, then another angel having a golden censer came and stood at the altar. He was given much incense that he should offer it with the prayers of all the saints upon the golden altar which was before the throne. And the smoke of the incense with the prayers of the saints ascended before God from the angel's hand. Then the angel took the censer, filled it with fire from the altar, and threw it to the earth. And there were noises, thunderings, lightnings, and an earthquake. So the seven angels who had the seven trumpets prepared themselves to sound. And so this leads us now into the trumpet judgments. And so the seven trumpet judgments are really the response of God to the accumulated prayers of his people over time for him to judge righteously. We saw that in the fifth seal. And God is going to fully answer these prayers now. These are the judgments that the angel who ascended from the rising sun held back until the 144,000 servants of God were sealed. So all of this is starting to fit in together into a nice time frame. These are the judgments that this one angel held back until they got the Jewish servants sealed in chapter 7. Again, another purpose of these judgments we're going to see is once again merciful in nature because they're designed to lead hostile unbelievers to repentance. And as we're going to see when we get to the end of the trumpet judgments, or at least the end of the sixth trumpet judgment in Revelation 9:20, is that they will not change their mind. They just won't. The judgment is not making a connection to them that they need to change their mind and trust in the Lord. And so let's now look at the first three trumpet judgments this evening. And the first one is in verse 7. Let's read that. It says, the first angel sounded what? Their trumpet. And hail and fire followed, mingled with blood, and they were thrown to the earth. And then notice the fractional aspect. And a third of the trees were burned up, and all green grass was burned up. Now, it's interesting to note, just as a note, we'll kind of bring this up, but there's some similarities between the trumpet judgments and then also the plagues that were unleashed on Pharaoh in Egypt before the exodus of the nation of Israel. And so we'll make those connections as we go. But this first trumpet judgment would be a bloody mess, okay? In addition to causing much damage, it would also cause extremely unsanitary health conditions in the general populace. Now, the text mentions the resulting destruction as the burning up of 1/3 of the trees on earth, and all green grass was burned up. Now, we know that the benefit of grass is that it takes in carbon dioxide and it breaks it down into oxygen. We know that it also stabilizes soil erosion and it reduces dust in the air. So there are benefits to having grass on the earth. But again, this much destruction of trees would cause less oxygen in the air, more carbon dioxide, and we would see entire ecosystems collapse. And so the collateral damage from this judgment would be hard to fully calculate. Now, when you think of trees in general, 1 acre of trees can provide enough oxygen for 18 people over the course of a year. One large tree, can supply a day's supply of oxygen for 4 people. So imagine the loss of 1/3 of the trees and how much oxygen would be removed, from the earth, and how much carbon dioxide would be introduced into the air. By the way, trees absorb carbon dioxide, which help keep temperatures lower. And so there's going to be a lot of ancillary effects, negative effects from this trumpet judgment. And so again, it doesn't get into the details of that. But again, this is going to be a very difficult judgment to deal with if someone is living on earth at this time. That brings us to our second trumpet judgment. And this is where the sea is polluted. Verse 8. Then the second angel sounded, and something like a great mountain burning with fire was thrown into the sea. And 1/3 of the sea became blood. And 1/3 of the living creatures in the sea died. And 1/3 of the ships were destroyed. Again, you see the fractions, lots of, the third of this, 1/3 of that, 1/3 of this. And so notice that it doesn't say, and this is where we want to be careful in our interpretation of Revelation. This is just a great verse to point out. Notice it doesn't say that a great mountain burning with fire was thrown into the sea, but rather something like a great mountain burning with fire was thrown into the sea. This is use of a simile. Okay, so it wasn't a great mountain, but it was something like a great mountain was thrown into the sea, and then 1/3 of the sea became blood. Okay, interesting to note, by the way, just as in terms of just research, chemistry research, but the only chemical difference between seawater and blood is that blood contains an iron molecule that's absent in seawater. And so possibly this mountain-like mass that John sees being thrown into the sea may have iron in it. Maybe it changes the chemical composition of the seas. It could be something like that. But again, we don't need an explanation, but that's a possible explanation. But something like a great mountain burning with fire was thrown in the sea, and when that happened, 1/3 of the sea became blood. Now, as I've said, it's a simile. It doesn't say a great mountain burning with fire was thrown into the sea, but something like a great mountain was thrown into the sea. We also see that marine life and marine economy will take a serious blow from this trumpet judgment. The loss of life and ships are probably centered in the area of the impact of this great fiery object. So 1/3 of all living creatures in the sea will die in this judgment, and 1/3 of the ships will be destroyed as well. Could you imagine the smell emanating from a bloody, water or bloody sea? In addition to a bunch of dead fish and sea creatures, it would just be almost overwhelming, the smell. And then you talk about 1/3 of the ships. To put this in perspective, there are almost, I think, 40,000 ocean-going merchant ships in our day. And this trumpet judgment, if that's the same number then, would destroy roughly 14,000 of those. So again, imagine how much valuable cargo would be lost as well, how that would destroy again, the commodity market and those types of things, destroying that much product that would be lost in the destruction of these ships. So that's the second trumpet judgment. It's interesting because these judgments don't give a lot of details. They just say this stuff's going to happen, and they don't really describe the ancillary effects. But as you start thinking through how this is going to impact things, again, these are very difficult judgments that the people on earth are going to be dealing with at this time. And then finally tonight, we want to look at the third trumpet judgment. The seas were impacted in trumpet judgment number 2. Now, fresh water is going to be polluted in the third trumpet judgment. It says, then the third angel sounded. Again, the angels are blowing the trumpets. And a great star fell from heaven, burning like a torch. And it fell on 1/3 of the rivers and on the springs of water. The name of the star is wormwood, and 1/3 of the waters became wormwood, and many men died from the water because it was made bitter. And so, again, verse 10, we've got a falling star from heaven, burning like a torch. So it's similar to what John saw in verse 8, but it seems like in verse 8 it was bigger, right? It looked like a mountain. This was just a falling star or a falling meteor, and it fell on 1/3 of the rivers and on the springs of the waters. And so this trumpet judgment again impacts the fresh water on the planet. This word star again translates that Greek word aster, so it's probably an asteroid or a meteor rather than a star itself. In fact, it seems to be smaller than what hit the sea in verse 8, just the way John is describing it here. And so in verse 11, we see that the star is actually given a name, which is the name wormwood, which is the emblem of poisonous bitterness. That's kind of the meaning of that word. And it's probably in reference to a plant that was known in the Old Testament times to be bitter to the taste. And although we are not given an exact number, this text tells us that many men die as a result of this trumpet judgment. And again, in parts of the world, just having sustainable drinking water is huge, because there's many parts of the world that don't. And this is going to be one of those situations where 1/3 of the fresh water supply on the earth is going to be made so bitter that it's deadly. And so again, just the effects of this is hard to measure. We're not given the details of the effects. It just says it's going to happen, but we know that's going to have an incredibly negative impact on the world at that time. So that's where we're going to pull up stakes tonight. So let me go ahead and stop sharing, and let me see if anyone has got any questions or comments about the study tonight, or if you missed any blanks or anything. I'll just kind of be silent for a second. And
hi, Aldi.
Yeah, hey Aldi.
Hey, Pastor John. I've got a couple of questions and a blank that I need filled in.
Okay.
Blank is on page number. You know what? Never mind. I'll just ask. Oh, I found it. Under chapter 6, page 5, at the top of the page, it's number 4.
Okay. Tell you what, can somebody help her with that? Does anybody have that one?
That's reject. Reject.
Reject?
Yeah.
I reject them both and want to be hidden from them.
Thank you. Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Next
You're welcome.
question we have, Pastor.
Sure.
Is, each one of these judgments, these might sound like stupid questions, but first of all, the judgment. We're going to be observing this from heaven, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. That is one of my questions. And
Yeah.
then the other thing is, it does not give in the text the timeline. It does not give how long each one of these are going to last, correct?
Correct.
7 years.
Right. Correct. Yeah. Each judgment. Yeah. It's not really given a timeline. We know it's going to happen within that 7-year period. So.
At different times.
Right. At different times. The only clues we have is the progression of judgments. So there's going to be, obviously the seal judgments will happen before the trumpets. So those have to happen first. But in terms of time frame, how long each one will last, it's not told unless the text tells us. Like when we get to the 5th trumpet, I think we're going to see that it lasts for 5 months. So that's a timestamp. But the other ones don't. A lot of them don't provide timestamps.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, good question. And even just a clarifying answer on your first one, if we've identified the players in the throne room of heaven, we kind of identified the 24 elders as church age saints, which would be the representative of us. Now, whether or not they are viewing the judgments or not, the text doesn't say. We should be clear. But obviously they're in heaven at this point. They may be viewing those things. We may be viewing those things, but we'll definitely be in heaven at that point, not on earth. But again, technically speaking, are we viewing it? It's hard to, it would be hard to say from the text.
I do have a couple of quick questions.
Sure.
Just your thought.
Uh-huh.
Like I said, surprise. The 5th and the 6th seal.
Yes.
The martyrs. Talks about more martyrs to come. Is he talking about Jews and Gentiles there?
I think so. I would take that, and I'll tell you the reason why. When you go to Revelation 12, and we'll kind of get there, and we'll identify all these people when we get there. So I'm just kind of assuming the interpretation, but I haven't tried to prove it yet. But in verse 17, it says the dragon, which is Satan, was enraged with the woman, which I believe is Israel. And we'll talk about that when we get to Revelation 12, which would be Jewish people. And then he went to make war with the rest of her offspring. I would see that as Gentile believers. So he's going to make war with the woman, and he's going to make war with the rest of her offspring. And I see both believing groups, believing Jews and believing Gentiles, fitting in there as to who Satan is going to persecute.
Cool. And this is just probably silly, but when the moon becomes black, the sun becomes black and the moon becomes red.
Yeah.
Is it just for a short period of time?
It seems to be, because I don't know if the world could sustain itself if it was a longer period of time. But again, that's speculation. We don't know.
And I don't remember if there's a reference somewhere to the sun and the moon, going back to their original form. But
yeah. I don't either. I know Joel mentions this phenomenon, in Joel 2. But in terms of how long it's going to last, I think it would be speculation, unless I'm not aware of something, another verse somewhere, which is possible for sure.
Oh, thank you, sir.
You bet. Thanks, Billy.
By the way, I hope you and fellows who are also going to Liberia are prayed for your safety and for your, may the Lord prosper the work of your hands.
Thanks so much, Billy. Appreciate it. Yeah, thank you so much. Let's see, Robert?
Yeah, I got a cousin for you, pal.
Oh, go ahead, Stephen. Hold on one second, Robert.
No worries.
Yeah, go ahead, Stephen.
Did that party say, will that be decided on in heaven with that there for a long time?
Say again, who are you talking about in heaven?
The silence for 30 minutes.
Oh, the silence, for 30 minutes? Yeah, so that's going to happen right when the 7th seal judgment is broken. There's going to be silence for 30 minutes. So that's in the future. Following the sixth seal judgment, and when the seventh seal is open, that's when that's going to happen.
Okay, thank you, Pastor.
Yeah, good question. Go ahead, Robert.
Yeah. Hopefully I won't butcher my question, but it has to do with the fifth seal, which is the martyrs.
Okay.
So a lot of my friends who are not pre-tribulational,
Yeah.
they specifically like to look at the fifth seal as this, because they see the seven seals not as the wrath of God,
Okay.
but as the wrath of Satan, the world, the Antichrist. So
Okay.
they see that the wrath of God begins when the world is saying the day of his wrath has come. You know, after the cosmic disturbances, they say, "Oh, behold, the day of the it's come."
Mm-hmm.
And I've looked at this on so many different I've just heard a lot of different people speak on this, and I just want to hear your thought on that. How does because I think there's other ways to prove a pre-tribulational rapture aside from that, but I still kind of like the elders or the church and all that. But why it just doesn't seem to follow the flow. It seems like Jesus is opening these seals, and something happens on the earth, right? That seems to be like destructive in nature, like Antichrist, famine, war. But then you get to this one, and it's the believing tribulation saints, and they're martyred. So I guess in a sense, like my thought is, how that doesn't seem like God's wrath. It seems like a cause of the wrath, like a cause of the response of mankind.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I just wanted your thoughts on how that might.
So let me ask you a question. So what you're saying is the view that you're talking about would view the rapture in the fifth seal, like the fifth seal would be where the church is raptured. Is that kind of their take?
So they see the rapture as, I think it's in Revelation 7 where they say there was a great multitude in heaven, no one could number.
Yeah.
And they were praising God. They see that as the rapture.
Okay.
But they see the martyrs as proof that those sealed judgments are not the wrath of God, because their argument is, well, how could the fifth seal be God's wrath when it's a bunch of martyrs? So
I see.
Thus, the seven seals are not the wrath of God. Even
I
Jesus
see.
is just sitting up there opening them. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I think that honestly, I think they have more of a burden of proof than we would. I just don't understand. I guess I'm having trouble understanding their view. But my whole thought on that, and I tried to answer that a little bit in the notes, but I didn't go into a lot of detail. Is the judgment there is basically that God is going to he is going to avenge their blood. That's the judgment. He's not doing it there in the fifth seal. He's waiting for all of the martyrs to be killed, and then he is going to avenge their blood. So you might say the judgment of the fifth seal is going to culminate at the very end of the tribulation when he actually finalizes his judgments. So that's kind of probably what I would say. It's a precursor, a promise of final judgment, and that's the seal judgment. It just isn't executed at that time the seal is broken. Does that make sense, what I'm trying to say? I don't know if that answers.
Hey,
that's
John?
a great response. I've never heard that, so thank you.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
I've got a follow-up to that.
Sure.
Why would Jesus be the only one able to open up those seals if it wasn't God's judgment?
Yeah.
I mean, they looked all over for somebody that if it was man's judgment, then man could open up those seals.
Right.
I'm just saying it started at the very beginning from the very first seal that Jesus was the only one that was capable of opening those seals up.
Right. And not only that, the trumpet judgments come out of the seventh seal. They're really kind of an outflow. One other thing, Robert, and these are good questions because they get us thinking through. The other thing is in verse 16 and 17, it says, "For the great day of his wrath has come, and who is able to stand?" I don't think that's a forward-looking statement at all. I think it's a backward-looking statement at the judgment that they're experiencing in that moment, which they're hiding from the rocks. So, and I know these are unbelievers speaking, but to use their logic against them, they're not declaring what's coming. They're declaring what they're experiencing, which is the sixth seal judgment at that moment. This is why they're saying they view that as the wrath of God. And so again, I don't know. I would just have trouble with that view. I guess I'd be open to trying to understand what they're saying more, but it doesn't seem very strong, in my opinion. But yeah, I'm ignorant of it, the details of it.
Yeah, real quick. I know Andy Woods and a lot of writers they say exactly that they're looking back at what is happening.
Yeah,
that's kind of what
which fits the context. I don't think they're just pontificating on their recliner. Oh, the wrath is coming. I think they're in a cave while they're screaming this, because it's what's going on and what's happening. So yeah, good point. Billy, go ahead.
Well, just like Kathy, following up on it. What's the Greek word for church? Is it ecclesia?
Yep. That's it.
That word isn't mentioned in Revelation after chapter 4
Mm-hmm.
until the very end.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah, if it was talking about the church, wouldn't there be some reference to that? And like you, I've heard that in verse 16, 17, when they're hiding from the wrath of the Lamb. I mean, that's from the wrath of the Lamb. Well, the Lamb, like Kathy was saying, is the only one. I mean, he is God, and he's the only one that was worthy to open it.
Yeah.
And it's right there. It's the wrath of the Lamb, and
that's
they're
right.
all, and that's looking back on all of the seals.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, so that would be the argument I think we would make against that view. So yeah, very good, well articulated. Anybody else? Comments, thoughts, questions?
I got one more question.
Yeah, go ahead, Stephen.
Oh, let me go back to my notes.
Okay. Yeah, take your time.
Will the folk hunters look like Hercules?
Uh-huh. Say again?
Will he look like Hercules?
Who's that? The horseman?
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. They don't really say. They don't give us that detail. So, yeah, good question. I don't know.
Thank you, Pastor.
Yeah, you bet, Stephen. All right, anybody else before we call it a night? All right, good questions. So, hey, just as a reminder, I'm leaving for Liberia, West Africa on Thursday. And so we will not have our study the next 2 Sunday nights. So the 21st and the 28th, we will not have a study. We'll try to remind you at church. And so we'll pick back up August 4th. So if you could just kind of mark your own calendar, and then we'll try to remind you. And then we will, as Billy asked, but we'll put the notes for August 4th in that study. They'll be in the Sunday school room that morning. And then we'll put the link to the notes if you want to print them at home or fill them out on your computer during the study. We'll put that link up on the Friday prior. So I think that would be August 2nd, if I'm doing my math correct. So that's the game plan. So just kind of mark your calendars, and I sure appreciate it. Let's close in prayer. Pam, thanks for your prayers and about the trip. So let me just close in prayer. Lord, thank you so much for the study of your word this evening. We're so grateful to be able to dive into the book of Revelation, and it's an encouraging book, Lord, to see that you are in control, that you're worthy, that one day you're going to make all things right. And we just look forward to that day. We agree with John, as he'll say at the end of this book, come Lord Jesus, disrupt our week and come back for us. We'll take you. We'll take it anytime. And so we're looking for you in the clouds. We just rejoice in your word and the ability to look at it this evening. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Pastor, thanks, Pastor. We'll be praying for you.
Thanks so much. Yep.
Pastor,
Yeah. Hey, Billy.
I'm so sorry. No, I have the notes printed out. I was talking about a completed copy.
Oh, like with the answers.
Yes, sir, because we missed last week.
Oh, yeah. Well, if you wanted to, the audio is now up.
Is it really?
Yeah, we're putting the audio up.
Yes.
Robert is putting it up almost within an hour of the lesson. He's putting it up.
That's awesome.
So that'll be up there. Okay. Okay, awesome.
Yeah, awesome, Pastor. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're so welcome. Good night, everybody. Thanks for coming out. Okay, good night, Stephen.